Town of Washington Historical Society meeting on Thursday, February 15th. The year is 2001 at the Loyal Memorial Federated Church in Millbrook. And Dr. William Goodman, veterinarian, is going to talk on the importance of draft horses in the community, and also how veterinary medicine has changed over the past, over like 100 years of he and his father and his grandfather's veterinarian practice.
To be able to introduce you all to a very special character. Well put. And I say that because in my experience, our community is filled with characters. And every time we feature a different person, we find out just how extraordinary we are. You know, there's an old adage about white bread, bland, no real taste, no real personality. Well, that's an expression that doesn't fit this community. Because if you look around, every person here, your neighbor, to your left and right, in front of you and in back of you, qualifies as a real character. So, think of all of you eventually doing what Doc is doing tonight and sharing with the rest of us your stories, your experiences, your insights. Because that's what local history is. We've done it before in Alden Place when we talked about the Italian community that was there. Some of you were a part of that. We've talked about so many wonderful, wonderful things that we share. That's our common history. Tonight, with Doc's guidance and insight, we're going to be exploring an occupation that every community depended on. If we didn't have our veterinarians, we wouldn't have had a community. And Doc has seen it through not only his eyes, but his family's eyes. And with that, Doc,
that is a tough act to follow. So eloquent. Only not a character. I don't think that's what I've been called. I think eccentric. Eccentric is the right word. Or infamous Dr. Goodman, or notorious. Well, I am honored, honestly, to think that I would be asked to speak for the assembled multitudes here, and I'm amazed how many people have showed up. And I want you all to know that the checks are in the mail. They don't arrive. Don't ask me. Just call the post office, because I'm sure they're there. I sort of have a unique position in the veterinary community because my family dates back. In fact, next year will be 100 years of veterinary medicine in my family, and there's very few families that have gone that long in the same career group. But and I have a lot of stories, and that's what I'm going to talk about, are the stories that went on in veterinary medicine and the handling of animals over the last 100 years. And I certainly know it well from the 30s on, because my first job in veterinary medicine was working for my dad probably around 1930 or something like that. So that's before most of you were born, I know. Anyway, I'd like to introduce a few people here that are very important in my life. A couple members of my staff here. Christy, Jennifer in the back is a practice manager. She's been with me 8 years. And Nan, of course, everybody knows Nan. Better Nan. Now, my life has been filled with serendipitous happenings. It seems like that's the way my life unfolds. You think it's water, but it's booze. My hands are shaking. For instance, Nan and I first met probably 1929 or 30, and her mother was a client of mother raised Karens at that time. And so when she would bring a Karen to my dad on Great Neck, Long Island, she would say to him, "Gary, stay out. I want the baby in its carriage. I want the baby." She's still rocking me. But the serendipitous part of this is 1947, went to the University of Vermont, and guess who sat next to me in the chemistry class? Now that's serendipitous. And so we've been together ever since 1947. That's a little bit of time. I came into the area. I'm getting to the subject. Don't worry about it. I've got my eye on the ball. But it's another serendipitous situation. My dad knew that war was coming in 38 or 39. He began to think, I don't want to be in the metropolitan area. I'm a farm boy. If things go bad, I think we ought to have a farm. So he looked for a farm within an hour and a half or so from Long Island. And we bought, and I can't remember, it was 39 or 38. We bought the Gardner Hollow farm from Bill Gardner, who many of you knew and knew. And for me, Bill Gardner was probably the mentor of all mentors, because I worked with him for about 2 years. He continued to work the farm on the horsepower, and as my dad's farmer. And I worked there most of the time. He taught me all that I know, and I know a lot, and if I had been teaching him, he would know nothing, but he taught me, and I know a lot from him, because he was a wonderful teacher, shearing, at that time, all of the family farms, and they still were in existence in the late 30s. They all had apple groves, they all had sheep, they all had a few hogs, they all had a few milking cows, 15 cows or so, and they all had a team of horses or two. And so I learned to work all those animals and handle them, and I gained an experience that was really 100 years back, because nothing had changed in the handling of animals in the previous probably 1,000 years. And that's how my interest got into working with draft horses. But more than that, in 1940, Daddy decided he'd buy a farm all land. We had a team, but he decided to get a farm all land because he wanted to put more land under cultivation. So we came up here to Raven Bridge, and I remember sitting on the seat of the tractor and feeling really powerful with this big M underneath me, and looking out where the diner is. And when we left, we went down Delaware Hill and back to Cool Creek that way. I remember going down Delaware Hill, and I'm sure all of you said the same thing. I said, if I am going to live here someday in this area. And it just came into my mind just like that as we went around the curve. And I worked pretty hard to get here, and I'm blessed to be here, because this is, as all of us know, we are really blessed individuals to be here, because other people pay a lot of money to come here and enjoy it for a weekend, and we get a chance to enjoy it 365 days a year. Other small occurrences, which are sort of serendipitous. Serendipitous is that phenomenon that occurs when something agreeable or pleasurable happens, and you weren't seeking that experience, and it just occurs. And so the farm in which my dad used to swap cattle was the British farm, which is right next to the land that we bought, the house that we lived in. And that was quite a stunning thing to me, because I had no idea when we used to go to get cattle at Gus Briggs, that's Ted's brother, a father, where the farm was. But I realized after I'd been living in the house I presently do, that Ted Briggs' farm was where we used to go to get the calves that we swapped back and forth some 30 years before. My grandfather was a great friend of Harry Flagler's. He was his veterinarian, but not only was he his veterinarian, but he was also his partner. And the house in which we now presently live and the hospital is located in. According to Jess Montague, a noted authority, Harry's girlfriend lived there in the house, Mary Wells. And that's kind of interesting. And there's another story about Grandpa and Harry Flavor. Harry and he would do real estate deals together, and Harry would put in $1 million, and Grandpa would put in $100. But it was still, they were friends on this type of thing. And so a real estate deal went bad, and for Flavor it wasn't a big problem, but for Grandpa it was a problem. And so they said, I'll make it up to you, says Harry. And so later on another deal came along. And he says, no, I'm still recruiting, I can't get involved again, so I've got to rest a little bit on this real estate business stuff. He said, no, come on, we're going on our railroad car, we'll go down to Florida, and I've got a deal there that you can't believe. So Grandpa went down with him all the way down there, just like watching cat and dogs about how good this deal's going to be. You get down there, Grandpa almost had a stroke. It was 6 inches underwater, as far as you could see, nothing but swamp, snakes, and everything you didn't want to have around. He said, this is ridiculous. He said, no, I'm going to build hotels and do this, that, and the other thing. Forget it, I'm out of this. I'm not going to get involved. So they went back, still hurrying all the way back to New York, where the Grandpa was going to be in on this deal. So Grandpa prevailed. He wasn't going to be in a bad deal like that, which turned out to be Dade County, Florida. Which they got for about 10 cents a acre. And then we had serendipitous occurrences here because we were in spaniel field trials for a long period of time in the 50s and early 60s. And we used to look San Bernardino all the time. And so I was familiar with it. So I think it was meant to be that I would be here in Millbrook, and I'm very happy to be here. Millbrook's also known for 2 famous veterinarians, other than myself. I told you I was eccentric. Interestingly, which very few people realize, that G. Howard Davidson of Altamont Farm was a veterinarian. He got a degree in Bachelor of Philosophy in 88 from Yale, then took a year at Cornell and got a bachelor's degree in agriculture, and then went down to the American Veterinary College in New York and took another year and got a degree as Doctor of Veterinary Science, which I think was really kind of interesting. And he was a very, very noted Shropshire breeder, Shire Stallion breeder, got involved in milking shorthorns, and that cow, Purity, that's on the calendar that David was talking about, and you must have one of those calendars, and you should send them to friends because they are a gem, That Purity was the great Guernsey cow that he bred. And interesting, when I was going over some material that Vinnie Arbison gave me, it was on G. Howard Davidson. In there was an invitation to a party at Altamont Stock Farm in 1929. It was signed G. Howard Davidson, Howard C. Davidson, temporary bachelors. Like that. And then another famous veterinarian, which some of you know and will speak about a little bit later on, Shirley Benham, Dr. George Knapp. There you are, back there. And George Knapp was a good friend of my grandfather's. And my father knew him and always came back with stories about George Knapp's antics. And Shirley gave me a picture, this is serendipitous, of a meeting of veterinarians in Pearl River. I'm getting my World War II meeting mixed up with Pearl River, on the other side of the river, Veterinary Laboratories, had a meeting with veterinarians, and here's my grandfather and Dr. Knapp. And it's the youngest picture I have of my grandfather in any veterinary circumstance. Dr. Knapp was the chairman of the State Board of Veterinary Examiners for 10 years, which is quite a bit. Now, two people that have been connected that are here this evening, that have been connected with veterinarians, and they'll speak a little bit later, and give some of their experiences, are Helen Ball, who worked with a public health veterinarian in Illinois, and Shirley Benham, who I've already mentioned, who worked with Dr. Knapp. Did I get that right? Yes, I got it right. I gave you 3 sheets of paper, not so much that you have to memorize this or anything like that. But that it does bring to mind how the world has changed for the agricultural community in the last 100 years. We all know that it's changed, but the most important thing, not the most important thing, but the thing that's really interesting here on the one section is that in 1960, there were 3.2 million horses and mules, or probably even less than that, but that's the record. But and now we have 7 million, and the great change that occurred in veterinary medicine in recent history is just that horses all of a sudden, that in my time, were not even around. The only horses that there were a few areas like Middleburg, Virginia, Millbrook, any place where there was a hunt group, a few commercial riding stables around the city, the Amish, and the racetrack, and that was it. There weren't any horses, a few token horses around, but that was it. And we didn't even take a horse in the farm medicine to speak of. I mean, it was a very, very little. And all of a sudden, bam, we're back again. And so that's a great change in veterinary medicine. And I'll speak about the change that occurred when the automobile came along when I get to my grandfather. But as you notice, the tabulation there on the changes in the cattle and the cows and the sheep, it's been really a dramatic change, because when I graduated from school, hog practice was a big, big part of veterinary medicine in the Midwest. Big part of it. That was a very important part of veterinary medicine. And that the total number of livestock in 100 years has changed relatively little, but the population is 4 times as great. Now, I couldn't find the figures for goats and chickens, and that's, of course, where the added meat is coming for the increase in the population, is the chicken population is just growing tremendously. And in the area in which we have a place down in Texas, you don't see cows anymore, you see goats. And that's the Caribbean population that's moved up here, and the Hispanic population consuming great food there. And the ranch that's behind our place, which is now being made into a mall, but was carrying about 500 or 600 goats on there. That's Russian control. I don't quite understand the change in the number of farms. I believe that part, that there were 6.5 million farms and they averaged 144 acres, because with a team you can work 100 acres relatively easily. But when you multiply less than 2 million farms by 432 acres or whatever it is, you come out with almost the same acreage of farms. This is out of the USDA report, but there's something wrong there. Dr. Hart up in Pine Plains, who's a great dairy veterinarian, gave me a fact that I thought was interesting. He just come upon that in 1950, the average farm, if you took the number of dairy cattle and the number of farms, you got 5 cows per farm. If you do that today, you get 85. And the center of milk production now is in Idaho, where they have 10,000 cows per farm, or 5 to 10,000 cows per farm. And any veterinarian graduating today can go to Idaho for $60,000 a year, because they are so desperate to get veterinarians out there. There are no veterinarians that want to go into dairy practice. And that is the premium price they're paying to get a graduate directly from college. The disturbing thing here is this 35% of the farm operators do not live on the farm. And of course that's soybean, corn, soybean, corn, what else? But then there's always an F after that, and that's for Florida. They go to Florida in the winter. You see, particularly up in Canada, where they have huge ranches of wheat. That's the other thing. free. But in the Midwest, that's 47% of the agricultural income comes from those types of farms in the Midwest. So these changes have occurred, and the veterinarians had to live with it, because in my grandfather's time, he graduated from what is now the Columbia Physicians and Surgeons in 1902, and became a fire department veterinarian, because that was a primo job. They were really good horses. They were always beautifully taken care of, humanely handled, and so he became their veterinarian, a veterinarian of 15 veterinarians, and eventually became chief veterinarian for the New York City Fire Department. There was 15,000 horses that they had. They only used them for a relatively few years, and then they put them out in pasture for retirement. The stress and strain of standing at a fire and the flames and the rate at which they had to get to the fire was quite destructive to their feet and to their nervous system as far as debility was concerned. They had to be high-geared to go, and yet they had to be stationary in place when the fire was being fought. So they didn't get very many years to do so. But anyway, when they started switching to gas-powered fire pumpers, he said, whoa, the handwriting's on the wall here. I better get in something more secure than just working with horses. And he opened the first veterinary hospital for dog and cat in New York State. I don't know about any other state. It may be the first in the nation, I don't know. But anyway, he was in Far Rockaway, and he had the Far Rockaway Dog and Cat Hospital, which he continued to practice at until he died in '69. And I've given you a list there of some interesting, important points on the history. And then when you get down to machine gun, that was the end of the cavalry, because you couldn't have a mass of horses moving against a mass of lead being thrown out. And so that effectively was the end of the cavalry. It continued to be around until World War II, and even in World War II. I had a refugee Hungarian veterinarian working for me. It was 57. And he had been a veterinarian under 3 military regimes. He was in the Hungarian army as a veterinarian and was captured by the Germans. And they took him on the march to Stalingrad. They killed all the other troops in the Hungarian unit that he was in. But they needed the veterinarian and the veterinary technicians that they had to service the cattle which they drove with them. And the horses, which moved, most of their equipment was moved by horsepower. Only the troops were moved by the trucks. Everything else was moved by horsepower, which seems, in our mind today, as mechanized as we were in the Second World War. The German army wasn't that mechanized. Their military weapons were, but not with the supply routes that were serviced from the horses and the cattle. So then, when he got to Stalingrad and the retreat occurred, they took them along with them because they had the cattle. They were in control of the cattle and the horses, and this is the way they were going to get back, is to be able to eat the cattle and the horses. And so, when they got close to the American lines, and those of you that were in World War II remember that in 45, I think, or 45, it was a terribly cold winter. I think it was 44. And he had the Germans stay with the cattle. The horses were free, he had the German troops stay with the horses, because he said, you don't want to lose these horses because this is the means by which you move your equipment. And we'll take care of the cattle. Well, veterinarians know that if the cattle have a stomach that keeps them warm, and they would get the cattle to lie down, the men lay right in between the cattle, and his troops that were in the veterinarians and the veterinary technicians stayed alive. When they got up in the morning, a blizzard had come in and it killed off all the Germans and all the horses. So they took the cattle and they went on their own, and when they got close to the Hungarian border, of course, then they knew their way, and they hid in the forest until they came in contact with a English guerrilla outfit that was servicing the guerrillas. And he acted as their translator. Then he got in with the Americans, acted as their translator, and eventually they brought him to the United States. He worked for him. So this was the importance of the role of the veterinarian when you had equine power and cattle for your food. And that occurred in World War II. So the cavalry wasn't around, but the food source was around. And then in the 20s, there was competition trying to make the horse equal the tractor, and they built these huge hitches, and there's pictures in the books there that I brought in of 20 to 40 horses pulling these big combines in the western part of Washington and Oregon. I guess it's the eastern part, in rain area. It's amazing. I went to a fair down with the Amish down in Schaefferstown, Pennsylvania, and they put this fair on for the education of their own young, and they put together, they just take anybody's horse that comes, and they put together a hitch of 40, 45, 48 today, I was there was 48 that they hitched together. They're doing this all barefoot, standing around, hitching them into these big hitches. Then they put them on a double, back wing disc that you see farmers using. And they start up with that thing, and they can swing it right into the corner, those expert teamsters, and just right along there within an inch or 2 inches of the stone wall. It's just beautiful. It's the most amazing demonstration of teammanship and being able to get strange animals, animals that don't know each other, to work together. And there's a special technique. They call them hitched in and tucked in, but it's a special type of harnessing arrangement that you use when you get these huge teams. And whatever the lead horse does, that's what the rest of the team has to do. And they use a jerk line. They just use one lead, and they pull on it tight, and it means the horse has to go to the right, and they give it a little jingle like that, has to go to the left. And that one horse way out front makes all the rest of the horses do the thing. So they have these huge hitches to compete with the tractor. And I just wrote down a couple things, but not for those that farm. But how much can a team of horses do as compared to the tractor? Well, a little 8N tractor, but most of you know what the 48N tractor is, those gray tractors you see. The ubiquitous gray tractor sitting in every farm lot that you've ever seen. That's a team. That's equivalent to roughly a team. And 2 horses could do 2 acres in a day of plowing. And then in 1909, some bright soul invented the sulky plow, sulky two-way plow. How many people know what a sulky two-way plow is? There's a hand. There's a couple others. Well, they called that the Cadillac of the plains. It was 1909 when you didn't have to plow by foot anymore. I mean, doesn't that seem awfully late? Everybody had plowed by hand, walking along in the furrow, terribly tired, and now they could sit back and enjoy a ride while the horse did all the work. And you could, with a riding sulky plow, you could do 3 acres a day. That's can't see, you can't see. Disking, 10 acres, grain drill, 10 acres, and cultivating corn, 5, that's a good one, John. And you have to be alert to not be sure it's done right. Boy, it's tiring. Mowing hay, 10 acres, and raking hay, about 20 acres. And generally, young girls did the raking with a single horse lots of times and a dump rake. 6 horses could do 6 acres a day. And so they tried to cut the time on doing the plowing and all of the jobs you had to do by making bigger hitches. It didn't work, obviously. And it's a good thing because it's very heavy work for horses to do. Now, the changes that occurred in veterinary medicine occurred the same as what was going on in agriculture. And I've covered that up to the 20s, the big hitches, the 40 then. My dad and my 2 uncles and his cousin graduated from Cornell in the 20s. He had a serendipitous situation. When he went to Cornell, 2 Crawford boys were there, and they were his roommates, and they said, well, come on home for Thanksgiving, and we'll show you the sights of New York City. And so he went down there and met my mother, And so that was love at first sight, and that was the beginning of a huge dynasty as far as the Goodmans, the Crawfords, and his. And I got 10 cents a thousand. Probably around 1932 or something. But the story I like best in the 30s, Barnum Bailey came to town, great name, and that was a sight. It wasn't like it is today. They had the elephants that carried the poles, and they took the poles, they dug a hole, the men dug the hole, and the elephant took the poles so it was upright, and they had these ropes, apparatus at the top, and they staked them in the ground. That was for the big top. And then they had these beautiful percherons, Barnum Bailey had percherons. That's the gray dappled horses. And they would carry all the seat equipment and the tents, and they had special unrolling apparatus. And I was about 4, I was telling Tom that I think I was between 4 and 6, maybe 5 years old, and I knew it was coming to town, and that was about 1,000 feet from the house. I had to cross the road, so I couldn't hardly sleep that night, knowing that they were coming. I had to be there to see the circus coming to town. So I walked down there about 3 o'clock in the morning. They had these the old-fashioned arc lights that the theaters used to use, and it was really kind of eerie. And I saw the elephants pulling the poles, and then they hitch an elephant with his harness on to one of the rail cars, and they pull that along because the circus was being built along the edge of the railroad tracks, and they just kept moving the railroad stock cars and the equipment cars along with the elephants just pulling them. And I was mesmerized, and this one fellow came over and said, "You're supposed to be, oh yeah, I'm not going to get in the way." No, I won't get in the way. And so then I went home, got in bed before 6 o'clock, and snoring away, pretending, and Daddy came in and woke me up. Oh, time to get up for breakfast, Lawrence. And I said, okay. And so that day, here comes, unbeknownst to me, he speaks to my dad that they had an elephant that was constipated. And so we hadn't had a problem in a week, and they had done everything that they knew what to do to relieve it because of the shipping problem and this, that, and the other. So Dad said, "Well, I never worked on an elephant before, but we'll see what we can do." And we had a product that we used to make a formula for treating mange in dogs, and one of the essential ingredients was mineral oil. SO heavy-duty mineral. And we had a 55-gallon drum down the cellar. So here comes a team of percherons up, and they hooked on this, just ran a couple ropes down in there and around the barrel, and then back up to the hitch on these percherons from the circus, and they just pulled this 55-gallon drum of mineral oil out of the cellar, which would take 4 men to do, because I think it was about a 400-pound can. And down, put it on a sledge and dragged it down to the circus, and Daddy rode along the garden hose, and he wasn't doing a large one, he was just doing small. And with the garden hose, and just told the elephant to open its mouth, a hoodah, is that the right name for an elephant handler? And he opened his mouth, and he poked this hose guy into his stomach, and he pumped in, I don't know how much he pumped in, but he pumped in a lot. And then a couple, 4 or 5 gallons of the product, I think it was called in those days carminitone. Do we still have carminitone these days? Right? No. And that was a stomatic. And then he gave me some Cascara Sagrada to stimulate the bowel. And my eyes were like this, this is really amazing. And the next day, the fellow comes up and says, "Doc, you are amazing. You should see the blowout we had." So, and it smells something terrible. Well, I remembered that because when we moved up here, it was before we moved up here, we gave Gail that llama. It was one of the other, but anyway, we gave Gail a llama. And Gail Bonnie, and it got constipated. And there was a veterinarian on the other side of the river that was with the zoo animals, and he was coming over here to Hillsdale to see some other exotics. So I made an appointment to go up there with this Gail's llama, and things just didn't go well. Gave him a tranquilizer, or not a tranquilizer, anesthetic, called M99. Do you use M99 anymore? Is that still being used? And, but it didn't work on the llama satisfactorily. It got a kind of seizure and like, and so I said, the hell with this, we get out of here. So we brought the llama back down, and Gail says, well, you've got to cure him now. What Gail says you got to do. So I thought back to my dad's days with the elephant. I said, well, give him a couple quarts of mineral oil every day. And so for 2 weeks, I gave him a couple gallons, I guess, I gave him mineral oil. And some parmesan, which was still available then. And the Cascaris crop. And she called me up after 2 weeks of this one day in the morning, very excited. She says, you can't believe what a blowout we had. You can't believe how bad it smells. Clyde survived because of something that happened about 20 years before with an elephant. In the 30s, the milkman delivered milk at our house, and that's another way that I get interested in the draft horses, because he let me drive the milk wagon. And of course, I wasn't driving the milk wagon. The horse was so trained, and a hard draft horse is always, or any horse, once they've done a routine for a while, they'll always do that routine. So he would stop at this house, and the milkman would get out and say, you drive him on to the next house. So I'd say, giddy up, and the horse would go, and then he'd just stop at the next house, because that's when the milkman caught up with us again. But I thought I was really being good, and that got me interested in draft horses. Can't quite read right now. Oh, in the 35, Spratt's produced the first dry dog food. Spratt's was an English outfit, and it was made out of agenized flour, which was bleached with chlorine. And what it effectively did was remove all of the vitamin B. And wire-haired terriers evidently had a very great susceptibility to vitamin B deficiency. So at least Daddy began to get a rash, not just Daddy, but all the veterinarians began to get a rash of convulsing wire-haired terriers. Daddy would have 20 of them. Yeah, at least 20 of them in there. And once one started a seizure, they all would start a seizure. It was unbelievable. It was before phenobarbital was being used for seizures, so there was some plant group that I think it was a product called root, and that was a big treatment for it. It was, I suppose, like one of these plant things that you use for an alternate medicine for sedation. But shortly after some research, they realized that there was occurring with the vitamin B deficiency, so then they started using vitamin B injections, and they would correct them just like this, right away. And in the 30s and the 40s, when an animal went into Spain, because we were using human products to sew them up, the catgut, and the anesthetics were so rough on them, that they'd be in the hospital for staying for 5 to 7 days, cats or dogs. And that was nothing. Today we get an animal in and they go home in the afternoon. You don't get them sudden incision swelling or anything. We used to have huge incision swellings because the catgut was tempered in tannic acid or something like that, and we really had a terrible reaction with the dog's tissues, and so you have a huge swelling. That's a great change that's occurred. There is a humorous story in the late 30s. A product named neopronosol came on the market. It was a German. I can't remember if it was sulfapyridine or sulfonamide. I can't remember which it was. But anyway, it was a red color, and you give it intravenous. It was the first cell phone. Daddy always liked to be on the cutting edge, and so somehow Winthrop had this product, and he wangled an experimental bottle of it, and Mrs. William Paley, the first Mrs. William Paley, was the head of CBS for many years. She had this white poodle that was very sick, which in retrospect probably was leptospira, which has an affinity for kidney tissue, and he said, this is the case we're going to use, and so he gave this animal a calculated dose of this product. And the temperature went down, and he used it for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and the animal returned to normal. And everybody was thrilled because formerly the animals that had these symptoms died. And the thing that was amazing was when the new coat became in, it came in the most beautiful Easter suit pink. And Daddy became the rage of the society for a short period, 15 minutes of fame, and to make white poodles pink. A side effect that nobody had expected. At that time, in the 30s, veterinarians didn't have x-rays, and they just were starting to come in just before, well, that hospital that's in the folder that's on the back table is my dad's hospital. That was built in 38. And that had an x-ray. And he didn't have an x-ray in the other hospital. And Grandpa said, well, it's all fine and good that you should get this x-ray machine in, and you will learn what fractures are like better than you can do it by hand. But you'll find that what you're going to do is say, oh, this is a fracture. You don't bother to feel it, you don't bother to manipulate it, and you just put it under the x-ray machine and take a picture. And you'll lose your diagnostic ability through your hand, what we call physical diagnosis. And that's exactly what happened, because Grandpa, they did this all the time. Grandpa would come over for a visit, and he'd manipulate this fracture, and he'd say, this, that, and other kind of fracture, and Dad'd say, okay, that's what it is, we'll see. Take an x-ray, and that's what it was. You get very gifted at what you have to use if that's all you've got. And the other thing that I remember from the 30s is that the pinning of legs came in with stainless steel pins. I'm watching the time, don't worry. And that was Dr. Stater that invented the pins that would pierce the leg. You drive the pin inside here and down here, and you had a special bracket that held it together on the outside. It's happened to come back again. And Grandpa said, well, it's okay to use those splints. And I think that's a great progress, but you want to remember some of those cats that get hit by a car, they're going to turn white and die about 3 weeks after you do that surgery. And so Daddy was experienced just exactly that. They do the surgery, and 3 weeks later, the cat would turn white and die. Not white in coat, he'd turn white in his membrane. What it was, of course, we didn't know what it was until we diagnosed feline leukemia, which didn't come in until the 70s or something like that. And what this was feline leukemia that the cat was living with, and then got hit by the car, and then went through the surgery, too much stress, knocked their immune system all apart, and needed the feline leukemia virus took hold, and they died because of inability to maintain their blood system. And so I just tell that because here was a man whose education was not the equal of what my father was, but he had, by observation, noted these things that would occur, and he could say to a client, well, this cat got hit by a car, and about 10% of cats I see just die 3 or 4 weeks later, even though there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with them. And I think that's an interesting observation where people would think that maybe feline leukemia just appeared on the horizon when the feline leukemia test was invented, but that isn't so. It's been around for a long period of time. And the veterinarians of yore were very active observers of the animal. And in human medicine, you don't have to be a very close observer of the animal because they will tell you what the problem is. But all veterinarians are very keen observers of the physical movement of the animal because they will give you a lead to that, where the problem is. Then in the 40s, the great thing that came along was the antibiotics. Salt in the 30s, that was just enough. But when penicillin came in, that made a difference. I remember a daughter of a veterinarian, classmate of my dad's. We saw her all the time. We were very close to the family, and she fell and broke her humerus right here, fell off the swing. There was a compound fracture where the bone was sticking through the skin. Amputation, that was in 1939. No antibiotic to treat with. That was the treatment. Civil War, World War I. Treatment of any fracture where the bone would come through the skin, cut it off. Well, she lost it, and about 2 months later, penicillin was available. And we don't understand these things today because we can't comprehend that just because you broke your arm that you have to have an amputation. But that's the way things were up until World War II. And you had to carry the penicillin around in your pocket because it was in peanut oil. And the peanut oil wouldn't be fluid enough standing on the shelf at 68 or 70 degrees where your room temperature was. But if you kept it in your pocket, it would stay fluid, and you could draw it out of the vial, and you could inject it. But we didn't have dry syringes. We didn't have plastic syringes like we have today. We had syringes which we kept in a wet sterilizer, and you had them in sterilizer, then you took them out, you washed them under the faucet, poured them out, flushed the water out as best you could, and then drew the penicillin, which was in peanut oil, and you gave it an injection in the muscle, and you had a beautiful abscess in about maybe 10% of the animals. 2 or 3 weeks later, the animal had recovered from the infection that it had, but it had an abscess that was draining, which you then solved by doing lancing it and debriding it. But what was causing the problem was not the peanut oil, but the fact that you had water and peanut oil together, and that you didn't have a sterile syringe to begin with. And so, in 1940s, the first sterile surgery began to be used. When I went to Cornell, that was the first class in 1949 to be taught sterile surgery. Up until that, it was antiseptic surgery. You washed your hands for 15 minutes, scrub, do the nails, do the cuticles, all the way around, scrub, and this 15 minutes, and then you go gaga, and you know what your hands look like after that. And then you did a 5-minute soak, and they had these rolling containers that were about like a flower pot, only about that big around. You stuck your hands in up to this point here for 5 minutes, one like this, and so that all the alcohol that was in there got into all your pores. Then you did surgery barehanded. And you remember that, you graduated that. No, they weren't doing it. We had 2 veterinarians in the room. We had Mike Murphy from Milford here, and Lynn Stevens from Burbank. So I have to be sure of my facts. I'm taking notes. I will hear about this later. But anyway, an interesting fact that occurred then was when the sterile surgery came in, we only had to wash our hands for 5 minutes. And then just alcohol was poured over our arms and our legs, our arms and hands, and then we just air dried them. And then we put gloves on, sterile gloves, and then we did surgery in a sterile outfit. Well, when the graduates went to work for the general practitioner who didn't know anything about sterile surgery and insisted that the new graduate do surgery barehanded, they were accustomed to only doing a 5-minute scrub and air-dried hands with alcohol rinse, and that wasn't, your hands wouldn't become sterile. So the new graduates were having a horrible time in the 40s with all kinds of peritonitis and abscesses from their incisions. And there was an uproar at that time. Every veterinary college, the practitioners wanted to know what cuckoo things they were teaching these new graduates, because every new graduate would get an abscess or have peritonitis. And so after they studied the whole routine and they saw what the difference was, then they explained to the practitioner either they had to gown this new graduate and use sterile gloves, or they had to go back to the old 15-minute scrub. And of course, when they learned how good it was to use sterile gloves and sterile gowns, then all the older practitioners switched. But it was the main topic of conversation at every veterinary meeting for quite a few years. In the 50s, the first real good vaccines came along. Formerly what we used was a vaccine that just depended upon the animal coming in contact with the disease. And if it came in contact with the disease, when you give it the injection, it had carried enough immunity that then they would become immune. But now in the 50s we had these products that were made by a new method, carried the virus in an attenuated form. And when they first came out, they were very good, but they did cause some distemper. That was the first one. And that was a problem, but then they just attenuated it, made it a little weaker, and then it worked out okay. And so all the vaccines, I would say that hardly any veterinarian has seen a case of dog distemper or even cat distemper, except the New York Times had an article in Sacramento, California, that had an epidemic of cat distemper because so few people were vaccinating their cats, because nobody has seen cat distemper in so long that there's a movement afoot among the younger veterinarians, the really recent graduates. We're not seeing distemper, we're not seeing all the hepatitis, so why should we bother to vaccinate for it? Or if we vaccinate, we only want you to vaccinate X number of years apart. And here, just 2 days ago in the New York Times, there's a report about an epidemic of cat distemper in Sacramento. So it's the wheel again. We used to have a lot of distemper. Daddy never had less than 15 or 16 convulsing dogs from cat distemper in the hospital. Before the live virus vaccine came in, our hospital caseload in the hospital, that's pictured in the back of the room there, was 85 dogs a day, 8 dogs and cats, 85. When the vaccines came in, we dropped to 43 like that. That's how much distemper, hepatitis was around in no time at all. Then late in the 50s came cortisone, and our caseload, which was 43, as soon as cortisone was used, our caseload dropped to 15 animals a day. And the reason was that all summer long we had no good flea products, and all summer long dogs were scratching and itching and making a mess of themselves, and so they had to come into the hospital to get this treatment that we used to calm the skin on the mange case. Well, mange was an epidemic during World War II because the nutrition was so low that every dog had mange. It was just a real problem. And the way we treated these animals was with a crude oil, mineral oil, the 55-gallon tank that was down in the basement with a constipated elephant. I just got to get it back in my mind. Crude oil, mineral oil, flowers of sulfur, and tincture green soap. And we made this up. We would use 400 or 500 gallons of that a summer. And you rub the dogs in every day for 5 days. You gave them a day's rest, and then you bathed them. And it didn't make any difference if it was Sunday or holiday, and the bathing day came, they had to bathe, because in the 40s and in the 50s, it was everybody that worked in the veterinary hospital worked 24/7. To some degree, it's still that way, but you worked every single day. And so, as soon as cortisone came in, the only thing you had to do was give an injection. And I still have flowers of sulfur. I still have the crude oil, a couple of gallons of the crude oil, that I haven't used it in since cortisone came in. It's magic. What's happened now, even more recently, is the spot-on flea control product, which has, I remember when Top Spot, Advantage, what's the third one? Anyway, let me go. There's 2 or 3 of them out there. I went to a lecture, I hadn't even heard about the spot-ons yet, and this dermatologist said, when you get the spot-on product, you're going to be amazed how little cortisone you're going to use. This is only maybe 10 years ago. I said, this is ridiculous. No product would be very good. No veterinarian uses very much cortisone anymore because there is no flea bite allergy to speak of. If a person is using the spot-on type products to control fleas, there are no fleas right now. I'm not saying what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the road. But that's how veterinary practice has changed, and for me, who remembers rubbing these animals in every day for 5 days and giving them a day of rest and then bathing them, and these cages, if you look in that folder, these cages were 3 by 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 by 4, and they were white enamel, and they had to be cleaned by 10 o'clock in the morning. And you had some scrubbing to do when you had these animals rubbing up against the walls all the way around. It was work in those days. When I went to Cornell in the early 50s, and I don't know whether when Mike was there, but they had a course in casting. You know, how to drop a horse on the floor, a cow, how to handle a pig, all these harnesses that you used on them, because if you were dealing with a big grand stallion, you had to be able to drop him on the side if you were going to do some kind of surgery. Well, what happened in the 60s? Tranquilizers. We used to have I'm going to get something. We used to have from about 24 leather muzzles that we had to keep in the office because the German Shepherds in the 50s were so rough. They weighed about 104 pounds, and also one of the reasons so many veterinarians from the 50s back were my size was because you had to have a lot of heft to work with these rank animals. And I remember I went on an ambulatory call with Ed Breland over in Kent, Connecticut, and we got as close as we could to a down cow in his cabin, and here we get the obstetrical kit. I think we had 2 of them, and it must have been about 50 pounds apiece. And we had to hike about 1,000 feet through this swamp area to get to the cow. We pulled the calf and everything eventually, but you had to have some heft to be able to do that. Well, tranquilizers came in, and now at the rank of stone, it became a pussycat. And what happened is, down the road, we didn't have to fight these animals anymore. You just give an injection, and they're just like lamb. Maybe not like John Katie's lambs, but it was a lot easier, and it allowed women to come into the profession. Now, true, in '68, the discrimination law said, you know, they have to have equal choice, and that's right. You could have equal choice, and still women wouldn't be able to handle a lot of these animals if they were as rank as they used to be. And it's just been a godsend, and everybody will say it. And so the strength and the wear and tear on the veterinarian is a lot less than it used to be. We used to go out to treat garget. Remember garget? Did you ever have to treat garget? Garget is mastitis. You'd go out and you'd see there was a little nick in the tail, and the cow had wolf in the tail. Hollow horn disease, people had hollow horn disease. And the castor withers, that's when they aborted. Because you had farmers that were uneducated, but many of them were back in the hills, and they were still living in the ancient times, and they were using language terms that we wouldn't use today. It's like looking at who's watched that old Creatures Great and Small. That was the life of the veterinarian pre-World War II. Many more characters than there are today, and the farmers weren't scientists like they are. They weren't businessmen like they are today. It's changed. And the value of the animals weren't what they were. And what allowed some of this stuff to occur is the electrification of the rural area allowed you could have milking machines, you could milk more animals. George Hoyt told me that electricity didn't come to Chestnut Ridge until 51 or 52. It seems almost impossible. It seems almost impossible that they didn't have electricity until then. But when you had the equipment, when you were milking a cow by hand, you know, if you did 15 cows, that was enough because you had the chores to do. No, it didn't make any difference. You could do 50 cows. And in the same amount of time. So electricity made a big change there for the farming and for the veterinarian. Then we come up to the 60s, tranquilizers, partially farmed chickens, that is getting to be a real problem where you have now chickens, veal, calves,